The Christmas lights of the Crestmore Resort were supposed to be magical, twinkling gold and silver threads wrapped around towering pines, casting a warm glow on the snow-dusted grounds. Inside, in the grand dining hall, crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with polished silver and starched white linens. It was the picture of holiday perfection, a scene straight out of a magazine. But from my seat at the far end of the long banquet-style table, it all felt cold and distant. I was practically an island, hidden behind a ridiculously large poinsettia centerpiece and the silent, gliding movements of the waitstaff. My cousin Bryn, the family's designated golden girl, had just landed another one of her signature verbal blows. Her voice, sharp and glittering like shattered glass, cut across the festive murmur. "Oh, Fallon's just exploring her options," she'd said, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "It's a very artisanal approach to unemployment." A wave of laughter rippled down the table. My uncle Darius chuckled into his wine-glass. My mother, Coraline, offered a tight, pained smile that didn't reach her eyes. Even my brother, Theo, gave a weak, non-committal shrug, his gaze fixed firmly on his plate. They all laughed. Everyone always laughed. Everyone except the waiter. The Christmas lights of the Crestmore Resort were supposed to be magical, twinkling gold and silver threads wrapped around towering pines, casting a warm glow on the snow-dusted grounds. Inside, in the grand dining hall, crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with polished silver and starched white linens. It was the picture of holiday perfection, a scene straight out of a magazine. But from my seat at the far end of the long banquet-style table, it all felt cold and distant. I was practically an island, hidden behind a ridiculously large poinsettia centerpiece and the silent, gliding movements of the waitstaff. He leaned down slightly, his voice clear and steady, perfectly pitched to carry in the sudden lull. "Ma'am," he said, extending a small, leather-bound folder. "Here is your penthouse key. Your champagne is already chilled and waiting for you upstairs." He was a tall man with a quiet, professional demeanor. I'd noticed him earlier, his movements efficient and unobtrusive. He moved past Bryn, his face a mask of polite indifference. He passed my mother, who was now dabbing at the corner of her mouth with a napkin. He walked right past my uncle, and then he stopped, directly beside me. You could have heard a snowflake land on the carpet. The gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of cutlery, the soft Christmas music, it all just stopped. Bryn's fork, halfway to her mouth, clattered onto her plate with a sound that seemed to echo through the cavernous room. I watched, as if in slow motion, as the color drained from my Uncle Darius's face, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. My mother's hand trembled so violently that the red wine in her glass sloshed against the rim. And me? For the first time in my life, at a table surrounded by my family, I felt no need to shrink, no need to apologize for my existence. I looked up at the waiter, a man I now recognized as Felix Granger, the resort's general manager, and offered him a genuine, unburdened smile. "Thank you," I said. I used to be the joke, the punchline at every family gathering, the loser cousin with a string of failed startups and a heart full of dreams that never seemed to pay the rent. I was the cautionary tale whispered over cocktails, the poor girl with big dreams and zero results. They had built my identity for me, brick by painful brick, but they didn't know what I had built in the shadows. They had no idea that tonight they were guests in my resort. I was humiliated at my brother's wedding, publicly called a nobody, and kicked out by my own family. 3 years later, I bought the very resort where they mocked me, and tonight, they were finally forced to call me ma'am. The memory of my brother Theo's wedding is etched into my mind, not with the soft focus of a happy occasion, but with the sharp, jagged edges of a wound. It was held at this very resort, Crestmore, 3 years before I would ever dream of owning it. The ballroom was a sea of ivory and gold, flowers cascading from every surface. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. My anxiety wasn't about finding a date or what to wear. It was about where I'd be forced to sit. And my worst fears were confirmed when I found my name card. Not at the main family table, not even at a table with distant relatives. I was seated at the kids' table, literally, a round table in the corner, decorated with colorful balloons, placed next to a gaggle of 7-year-old cousins who were already flicking peas at each other. I was 25 years old. My mother, Coraline, waved it off with a flick of her wrist when I'd tried to protest earlier. "Oh, Fallon, don't be so sensitive. It was just a numbers thing. You understand." I did understand. I understood that I was an embarrassment, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry she was trying to weave for her social circle. My brother Theo, the groom, just gave me a pained look from across the room, a silent apology that did nothing to soothe the sting. He was happy, and I didn't want to ruin his day, so I swallowed my pride and sat down, my knees bumping against the too-low table. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my neck to my cheeks. I could feel their eyes on me. My cousin Bryn, holding court at the main table, looked over and gave a theatrical little smirk. She leaned over to my Uncle Darius, her whisper just loud enough to carry. "Looks like Fallon finally found her people." Darius let out a booming laugh, slapping the table. "Well, their career prospects are probably about the same." The joke landed, and a fresh ripple of laughter washed over their table. I focused on tracing the patterns on the tablecloth with my fingernail, pretending I couldn't hear them, pretending it didn't hurt. But their words were like stones, each one finding its mark. "I heard she's a life coach now," Bryn continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "A life coach without a life. How very meta." "Still living in that shoebox apartment over the dry cleaners?" Darius added. "Must be cozy." "It's a studio," I wanted to scream, "and it's all I can afford." But I said nothing. I just sat there, a silent statue of shame, while the children next to me started a food fight with their dinner rolls. My mother caught my eye, and her expression wasn't one of sympathy, but of pure annoyance. My very presence was ruining her aesthetic. The final, crushing blow came with the main course. A waiter, flustered and rushing, approached my table. He looked down at his slip, then at me. "Salmon for Ms. Maddox?" he asked, holding a beautifully plated dish, before I could even open my mouth to say that yes, that was mine. Bryn's voice sliced through the air. "Oh heavens no," she called out, waving her hand dismissively. "Give her the chicken fingers. She's at the children's table. She's not even supposed to be here." The waiter froze, confused. The entire family table erupted in laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle this time. It was a full-throated, cruel roar. They were laughing at the absurdity, the perfect punchline. The poor cousin, relegated to the kids' table, being denied an adult meal. The waiter, mortified, mumbled an apology and scurried away, leaving me with nothing. It was in that moment that something inside me, something I had been carefully holding together with hope and sheer will, finally shattered. Then, my mother did the unthinkable. Coraline stood up, her posture ramrod straight, and walked over to my table. She didn't look at me, but at a point just over my shoulder. Her voice was low, but steel-edged and brutally clear. "Fallon," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument, "I think it would be best for everyone if you just left, before dessert is served. We don't want to cause any more of a scene." One night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of it all was suffocating me, pressing down on my chest. I felt stupid. I felt like a failure. Bryn's words, Coraline's dismissal, they all echoed in the silent, dark room. Had they been right all along? Was I just a fool with big dreams and no talent to back them up? I grabbed my phone, not to scroll mindlessly through the curated perfection of other people's lives, but to open the voice memo app. I needed to say it out loud, to hear it in my own voice, even if no one else ever would. I pressed record, my voice a raw whisper. "I'm not stupid," I said to the silence. "I know I'm not. I'm just lost. I've taken so many wrong turns and hit so many dead ends, but I'm not stupid." I took a shaky breath. This isn't the end. This is just the bottom, and the only way from the bottom is up. I will find my way. I promise myself, I will find my way. She didn't ask me. She told me. In front of everyone. My own mother was kicking me out of my brother's wedding, because I was an embarrassment. The air was sucked out of my lungs. The room swam before my eyes. I could feel the stares of dozens of strangers, the pity, the morbid curiosity. I saw Theo, his face a mask of conflict and cowardice, saying nothing. He just looked down. That hurt most of all. Without a word, I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. I stood up, my body trembling, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look at any of them. I couldn't. I made it as far as the ladies' restroom, stumbling into a stall and locking the door behind me. The sobs came then, violent and racking, tearing their way out of my chest. I cried for the humiliation, for the cruelty, for the brother who wouldn't defend me, and the mother who had just disowned me in everything but name. I cried until I was empty, my face pressed against the cold marble of the wall, the faint sound of wedding music a torturous reminder of the world where I didn't belong. I was the family joke. And tonight, the joke had broken me. Rock Bottom has a basement, and I found it in the 2 weeks following my brother's wedding. The sting of that public expulsion was a constant, throbbing ache, but it was amplified by the stark reality of my life. I was staying in a shared Airbnb, a single room in a stranger's house that smelled faintly of stale curry and regret. My shoebox studio apartment had become a luxury I could no longer afford after my landlord decided to sell the building. So here I was, living out of 2 suitcases, with a roommate I only saw in passing. A night shift nurse who left passive-aggressive notes about the state of the shared bathroom. My financial situation was dire. I had been trying to make it as a freelance wellness consultant, creating meal plans and workout guides for a handful of clients. But my last big gig, a corporate wellness package I'd spent a month designing, had ghosted me on the final payment. $2,000. It might as well have been $2 million. The company's emails went unanswered, their phone line disconnected. I had maxed out my last credit card buying groceries and paying for this depressing little room. The number in my bank account was a cruel joke, $17.42. Saying it didn't magically fix anything, but it was a tiny anchor in a swirling sea of despair. It was a promise. The next morning, fueled by that tiny spark and the last of my instant coffee, I sat on the lumpy bed with my laptop. The word freelance now left a bitter taste in my mouth. I needed something stable, something that paid on time, no matter how small. I needed a paycheck. So I did what so many people do when they're desperate. I typed Craigslist jobs into the search bar. The screen filled with a predictable list of manual labor gigs, sketchy sales positions, and data entry jobs that were probably scams. My heart sank a little further with each scroll. I wasn't above any work, but it all felt so far from the world I was trying to build, a world of wellness, of helping people feel good. It felt like a surrender. And then I saw it. A small, unassuming ad. Part-time waitress needed for spa cafe. Evenings and weekends. Must be reliable. It was on the far outskirts of town, a place I'd have to take 2 buses to reach. The pay was minimum wage. It was the opposite of glamorous. It was a world away from the Crestmore resort. But the word spa cafe caught my eye. It wasn't a greasy spoon diner or a loud sports bar. It was adjacent to my dream, a faint, distant cousin to what I wanted to do. Maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be a total surrender. Maybe it could be a strategic retreat. With nothing left to lose, I drafted a quick email, attached a resume that carefully omitted my failed consulting business, and hit send. I didn't expect to hear back. But an hour later, an email landed in my inbox. Can you come in for an interview tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Ask for Lorraine. The next day, after a long and rattling bus ride, I found the Gilded Lotus Spa. It was tucked away in a quiet, forgotten strip mall, sandwiched between a laundromat and a tax preparation office. The outside was unassuming, but when I stepped inside, a wave of calm washed over me. The air smelled of lavender and eucalyptus. Soft, instrumental music played from hidden speakers. The cafe was a small, bright space off the main lobby, with just a handful of tables. And behind the counter, wiping it down with a practiced, no-nonsense efficiency, was a woman who I assumed was Lorraine Price. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked up as I entered, her eyes assessing me in a single swift glance. There was no pretense about her, no false warmth. She was firm, solid, like an old oak tree. She was the woman who would, without knowing it, give me the shovel I needed to start digging my way out of rock bottom's basement. Lorraine Price ran her spa cafe with the precision of a drill sergeant and the quiet wisdom of a librarian. She was firm, yes, but there was an undercurrent of kindness to her that you only saw in small moments. The way she'd leave a cup of herbal tea for me at the end of a long shift, or the time she noticed me wincing and wordlessly handed me a tube of muscle rub for my aching feet. She didn't waste words. During my interview, she'd asked me 3 questions. Are you reliable? Are you a hard worker? And can you start on Friday? I'd answered yes to all 3, and I was hired. My life fell into a new, grueling rhythm. I'd wake up before dawn, work on my own projects, researching wellness trends, drafting business plans for a future that felt impossibly distant, and then I'd take the 2 buses to the Gilded Lotus. For 8 hours, I'd pour tea, serve quinoa salads, wipe down tables, and listen to the quiet chatter of women in fluffy white robes. But I couldn't turn off the part of my brain that was always analyzing, always looking for ways to improve a system. I saw the spa's potential, and I also saw why it was struggling. It was a beautiful, serene place, but its marketing was practically non-existent. A dusty Facebook page with a few blurry photos, a website that looked like it was designed in 1999. It was a hidden gem that was destined to stay hidden. During my breaks, instead of scrolling through my phone, I started reading. I downloaded free ebooks on my phone about digital marketing, sales funnels, and social media strategy. I'd sit in the tiny break room, my legs propped up on a spare box of napkins, and I'd devour information, taking notes in a little black book I always carried with me. One afternoon, Lorraine walked in while I was furiously highlighting a chapter on creating compelling Instagram content. She stopped in the doorway, her arms crossed, and just watched me for a moment. I felt a flush of embarrassment, quickly trying to hide my phone as if I'd been caught slacking off. "What's all that?" she asked, her voice neutral. I hesitated. I expected to be chastised for not resting on my break. It's just a marketing book," I mumbled. For wellness businesses." She raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "Why?" It was a simple question, but it felt loaded. It was an opening. I took a deep breath and decided to risk it. I couldn't keep living this half-life, pretending to be just a waitress. "Because this place could be doing so much better," I said, the words tumbling out of me. "You have an amazing service, a beautiful space, but nobody knows you're here. Your online presence is, well, it's not reflecting the quality of what you offer." I expected her to be offended. I expected her to tell me to mind my own business and get back to wiping down tables. Instead, she was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching my face. Then she did something I didn't expect. She pulled up a chair and sat down opposite me. "Tell me more," she said. So I did. I opened up my little black notebook and showed her my frantic scribbles. I talked about target audiences, about creating a brand voice, about using social media to build a community, not just to advertise. I talked about what the spas in the city were doing, the ones that charged 5 times what she did, and how we could adapt their strategies for her budget. I talked for 20 minutes straight, my passion overriding my nervousness. When I finished, breathless, Lorraine just nodded slowly. "I know," she said quietly. "I know it's failing, Fallon. I'm a healer, not a salesperson. I built this place with my late husband's life insurance. It's all I have, and I'm about to lose it." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and vulnerable. Then she looked me straight in the eye, her gaze sharp and decisive. "You have a fire in your belly," she said. "I saw it the day you walked in here. So I'll make you a deal." She leaned forward. "You're no longer a waitress. You work for me, on this. You help me turn this business around. I'll give you 6 months. If you can double our monthly revenue in 6 months, I'll give you a percentage of this business. 10%, to start." I was stunned. It was a lifeline I never could have imagined. 10% of a failing business wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance. It was a test. My mind reeled with the possibilities, and the terrifying weight of the responsibility. Could I actually do it? The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but the memory of Bryn's laughter, of my mother's cold dismissal, was a fire at my back. I had nothing to lose and a world to prove, not to them but to myself. I looked at this woman, this wounded mentor who was willing to take a chance on me, the family joke. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "When do I start?" Lorraine smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed her face. "You already have," she said, nodding at my notebook. That night, I didn't take the bus home. I stayed late, sitting in the empty, silent cafe, and I created a new Instagram page for the Gilded Lotus. My first official act wasn't as a waitress, but as a builder. The first month was a blur of frantic, hopeful energy. I lived and breathed the Gilded Lotus. I became a photographer, a copywriter, a social media manager, and a digital strategist, all while still occasionally having to jump in and serve tea when we had an unexpected rush. I took high-quality photos of the treatment rooms, focusing on the textures, the soft, warm towels, the smooth massage stones, the steam rising from the aromatherapy diffusers. I wrote captions that didn't just sell services, but sold a feeling: serenity, escape, self-care. I started a weekly email newsletter with wellness tips, and I designed a simple, elegant new booking page for the website. Lorraine, true to her word, gave me complete creative control. She watched from a distance, a silent, supportive presence, never questioning my methods. The first small wins felt like seismic victories. Our Instagram followers ticked past 1,000. A local blogger with a few thousand followers came in for a complimentary facial and wrote a glowing review. Bookings started to trickle in, then flow. We went from having 1 or 2 clients a day to being consistently booked for massages on Saturdays. I created a spreadsheet to track our revenue, and at the end of the first month, I showed it to Lorraine. We had increased our monthly income by 30%. It wasn't double, not yet, but it was a significant jump. Seeing the relief and hope in Lorraine's eyes was a better payment than any paycheck. The real breakthrough came in the middle of the second month. I had been experimenting with short-form video, trying to capture the spa's calming atmosphere. One evening after we had closed, I filmed a simple 15-second video. It was a time-lapse of me preparing a treatment room, lighting a candle, folding a towel into the shape of a lotus flower, and pouring a cup of herbal tea. I set it to a piece of peaceful, trending audio and posted it to TikTok, a platform I was just starting to understand. I didn't think much of it. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing incessantly. The video had gone viral. Not just local viral, but viral. It had 100,000 views, then 500,000. By the end of the day, it had over 1 million. My simple, quiet little video had struck a chord with people who were craving peace and aesthetic calm. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Our online booking system crashed from the traffic. The phone rang off the hook. We were completely booked out for the next 3 months. I had to quickly hire and train 2 more part-time staff members just to handle the influx. It was chaos, but it was the most beautiful, exhilarating chaos I had ever experienced. I was walking on air. I had done it. I had taken a failing business, and with one lucky video, had put it on the map. I felt a surge of pride, so pure and powerful, it almost brought me to tears. In a moment of naive excitement, I took a screenshot of our now thriving Instagram page, the one I had built from scratch, and I thought about sending it to my family. A little look at me now moment, but I stopped myself. It felt too petty. I didn't need their approval. But my mother, Coraline, found it anyway. I don't know who sent it to her, or if she found it herself while searching for new ways to be disappointed in me. A screenshot appeared in the family group chat, the one I never muted out of some morbid curiosity. It was a picture of our new online ad, the one I had designed. Underneath it, my mother had written a single devastating sentence: "So this is your new empire, Fallon." It was followed by 3 laughing face emojis. The message landed like a punch to the gut. She had taken my success, my hard-won victory, and twisted it into another joke. The empire was sarcastic. The laughing emojis were daggers. I waited, my heart pounding for someone to defend me, for my brother Theo to say that's amazing, Fallon, or leave her alone, Mom. But there was only silence. I could see the read receipts next to his name. He saw it, and he said nothing. His silence was a confirmation of her mockery. All the air went out of me. The joy, the pride, it all evaporated, replaced by that old familiar shame. I wanted to crawl into a hole. I walked into the spa's break room, my hands shaking, and sank into a chair. I was ready to quit, to walk away from it all. What was the point of building something if the people who were supposed to love me would only ever use it as ammunition to hurt me? Lorraine found me there, my head in my hands. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just sat down and waited. I finally lifted my head and showed her the message on my phone. She read it, her expression unreadable. She handed the phone back to me. "People don't laugh when they think you're a joke, Fallon," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They laugh when they're scared." I looked at her, confused. "Scared of what?" "They're scared you might actually make it," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "They're scared that the story they've written for you, the one where you're the family failure, might not be the true one, and if you succeed, it forces them to look at their own lives, their own choices. Your success is a mirror, and they don't like what they see." Her words were a balm on a raw wound. They didn't erase the hurt, but they reframed it. They weren't laughing because I was small. They were laughing because they sensed I was becoming bigger than they were comfortable with. And in that moment, I made a choice. I would not quit. I would not let their fear dim my fire. I would let it be my fuel. The viral moment was a double-edged sword. It brought a flood of new business. But it also brought attention we weren't entirely ready for. And with that attention came the predators. About a month after our TikTok fame, I received an email from a corporate acquisitions manager at a large national wellness chain. They called themselves Zenith Wellness. They were the big box store of spas, generic, soulless, but everywhere. They had seen our impressive social media growth and were interested in acquiring the Gilded Lotus. They wanted to absorb our brand, our client list, and our unique marketing angle into their massive portfolio. The offer they made was, to put it bluntly, crumbs. It was a lowball figure that barely covered the spa's outstanding debts and would have left Lorraine with a pittance and me with next to nothing. But to Lorraine, who was still terrified of losing everything, the offer sounded like a safety net. "Maybe we should consider it, Fallon," she said one evening, looking over the contract proposal. There were dark circles under her eyes. The stress of managing the sudden growth was getting to her. "It's a guaranteed payout, no more worrying about payroll or rent. We could just be done." I looked at the contract, at the fine print that essentially stripped us of everything we had built. They weren't buying a business. They were buying our momentum, and then discarding the shell. They wanted to gut it for parts. "No," I said, my voice firm. "Lorraine, this is an insult. They see a small, independent spa run by two women, and they think they can bully us. What we've built here is special, it's authentic. If we sell to them, they'll turn it into another one of their sterile, cookie-cutter locations. The Gilded Lotus will cease to exist." "But what if this is our only chance?" she argued, her voice trembling slightly. "What if the hype dies down and we're back to where we started?" It was a valid fear. I had it too, but I also had a conviction that burned hotter than my fear. "Then we make sure the hype doesn't die down," I insisted. "We don't need them. We have a community now. We have a brand. We need to leverage that, not sell it for parts." It took 2 days of long, intense conversations, of me showing her my new projections, my plans for the next phase. I proposed we create our own products, something we could sell online to our newfound national audience. We could build an income stream that wasn't dependent on people walking through our physical door. I convinced her to hold out, to bet on ourselves one more time. My idea was simple. We would codify the philosophy of the Gilded Lotus. I spent the next month working late into the night, long after my official duties were done. I wrote an ebook titled The Lotus Method, a 30-day guide to finding serenity in a hectic world. It was filled with mindfulness exercises, simple recipes, and the kind of gentle, encouraging advice that was the hallmark of our brand. Simultaneously, I developed a short 4-part online video course on creating a peaceful home environment. We used a simple, user-friendly platform to launch them. I poured every bit of my marketing knowledge into the launch, sending out a series of emails to our growing list, creating teaser content for social media, and running a small targeted ad campaign. The night we launched, I sat with Lorraine in the quiet spa, watching the sales notifications on my laptop. The first one came in, then another, and another. By the end of the first week, we had sold over 500 copies of the ebook and 100 enrollments in the course. I did the math on a napkin, my hand shaking. We had made over $20,000. In 1 week, it was more than the spa had made in the entire 6 months before I arrived. Lorraine just stared at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then she started to cry, not with sadness or fear, but with overwhelming relief. We had done it. We had built a second, powerful revenue stream. We were no longer just a struggling local spa. We were a national, digital brand. That afternoon, I took the first portion of my own earnings and walked to the bank. I opened a new business account. I filed the paperwork online, my heart pounding with a sense of quiet, momentous gravity. I officially formed Wren Collective LLC. It was my name, a piece of myself, hidden in plain sight. It was the first, secret brick in the foundation of my own empire. The digital success of the Gilded Lotus created ripples, and not all of them were friendly. Word was getting out beyond the wellness community. My name, Fallon Maddox, was attached to the ebook and the course. It was inevitable, I suppose, that it would eventually find its way back to my family. And where my family was, Bryn was never far behind, lurking like a shark, smelling blood in the water. She must have been furious, seeing the success I was having. The loser cousin was suddenly getting press on wellness blogs, being tagged in grateful posts by customers. It didn't fit the narrative she had so carefully constructed for me. So she did what she does best, she tried to tear it down. I found out later that she had created a fake Instagram account, a Finsta, to anonymously stalk our page and my personal profile. She watched everything, collecting screenshots, looking for any perceived weakness. Then she leaked what she found to a bottom-feeding online gossip site, the kind that thrives on anonymous takedowns and manufactured outrage. The article was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive character assassination. It was titled, "Local Guru Faking It: The Truth Behind the Gilded Lotus." The piece, citing an anonymous source close to the family, painted me as a fraud. It twisted my past failures, the ones Bryn knew about in excruciating detail, into a pattern of deception. It claimed I had no real qualifications, that I was just a failed life coach who got lucky with a viral video. It even included a picture of me from years ago, looking young and awkward at a failed business pitch, juxtaposed with a professional headshot I was now using. The most damaging part was the accusation that we were faking our results, using bots to inflate our social media numbers, and posting fake testimonials. The fallout was immediate. The link to the article was spammed in the comments of our Instagram and TikTok posts. Our page was mass reported for being spam or fraudulent, a classic troll tactic. Within hours, Instagram had automatically suspended our account for a violation of community guidelines. Our main marketing engine, the one I had poured my heart and soul into building, was gone. Just like that. My confidence, which had felt so solid just days before, crumbled into dust. And Hyman into Tyan to vlog Pefter count. The shame was suffocating. They weren't just laughing at me in the family group chat anymore. They were trying to publicly, professionally destroy me. The old voices came roaring back. "You're a fraud. You're not good enough. You just got lucky. You're the family joke." I sat in my small room, the walls feeling like they were closing in, and I seriously considered running away. I could just disappear, change my name, move to another state, and get a job where no one knew me, where no one had any expectations. The thought was seductive. It promised peace. It promised an end to the fight. I called Lorraine, my voice choked with tears, and told her I was done. I told her I couldn't take it anymore. "They win," I sobbed into the phone. "They win." Lorraine listened patiently, letting me pour out all my fear and despair. She didn't try to argue with me or give me a pep talk, she just listened. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Check your email, Fallon," she said softly. "The business email. I forwarded you something." Confused, I hung up and opened my laptop. There, at the top of my inbox, was an email forwarded from Lorraine. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." I clicked on it. It was from a woman who had bought our ebook a few weeks prior. Her message was long and heartfelt. She wrote about her struggle with anxiety, about feeling overwhelmed as a new mother, about how she had lost herself. She said that reading my book, doing the simple exercises I had outlined, had been the first time in years she had felt a glimmer of hope. She wrote, "I know it might sound dramatic, but you didn't just sell me a book. You gave me a piece of myself back. You changed my life." I read the email once, then twice, then a third time. The tears that came now weren't tears of shame, but of something else entirely. They were tears of profound, aching gratitude. Bryn's anonymous attacks, the gossip sites, the suspended account, it was all just noise. It was the meaningless chatter of unhappy people. But this was real. This was a human connection. This was the entire reason I had started down this path in the first place, to help people, to make a small positive difference in someone's life. In that moment, something inside me shifted, hardened, and clarified. They could take down my Instagram page. They could write lies about me. But they could not take this away from me. They could not take away the fact that I had helped this woman. And if I had helped her, I could help others. Bryn's sabotage wasn't the end. It was a signal. It was a signal that I was becoming too big to operate in the open, under my own name. It was time to pivot. It was time to go silent. Bryn's attack was meant to be a killing blow, but it ended up being a catalyst. It taught me a valuable lesson: visibility is a vulnerability. While she was busy trying to burn down the Gilded Lotus, I was already sketching out the blueprints for a fortress. I realized the brand we had built, tied so closely to my personal story and face, was an easy target for those who wanted to hurt me. I needed to build something bigger, something more resilient, something that wasn't about me at all. I decided to pivot, hard. I sat down with Lorraine, my notebook filled with a new vision. "We're going to let the Gilded Lotus fade," I told her. "We'll keep it running as the local spa it is, but the national brand, the digital presence, we're going to let it go dormant." Lorraine looked at me, her brow furrowed. "But all that work, it wasn't wasted," I assured her. "It was phase one. It was our seed money. Now we plant a new forest." My new concept was born from the noise of the sabotage. If the world was going to be loud and ugly, I would build an empire of silence. "Wren Cove," I said, writing the name down. "It's a new brand under my LLC. It won't be about spas or facials. It will be about one thing: silent retreats. Deep immersion wellness experiences where people can truly disconnect. No phones, no social media, just peace. It's untraceable to me, untraceable to the Gilded Lotus. It's a completely new entity." The idea was to use the profits we'd made from the ebook and courses as the down payment. Not on a building, not yet, but on a property. My research led me to an underperforming resort on a lake about 3 hours north of the city. It was beautiful, but poorly managed and on the verge of bankruptcy. It was too big for us to buy outright, but I had another idea. I approached the owners not with an offer to buy, but with a proposal to partner. Wren Cove would acquire a significant controlling portion of the resort. We would take over one of the secluded wings, rebrand it as the Wren Cove Lodge, and run our silent retreats from there. The resort's owners, desperate for a cash infusion, agreed. The deal was complex and took months to finalize. I was in over my head, learning about property law and equity partnerships from library books and free online legal guides. But I was driven by a new, cold clarity. I funneled every spare dollar from Wren Collective LLC into this new venture. I hired a small remote design agency to create the branding for Wren Cove. The aesthetic was minimalist, sophisticated, and deeply calming. The logo was a simple, elegant bird. There was no About Us page with my story. The founder was anonymous. The brand was the star. The real work was happening behind the scenes. I was still living in a small rented room, my life a stark contrast to the luxury brand I was building. My days were a grueling marathon. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., work on the Wren Cove strategy, then head to the Gilded Lotus to help Lorraine manage the day-to-day. My nights were spent on conference calls with lawyers, designers, and the resort's management team. I was a ghost, a shadowy figure pulling strings from a laptop in a tiny, cramped room. I was unseen, unheard, and more powerful than I had ever been. One of the first things I did was hire staff for the new Wren Cove Lodge. I didn't post on major job sites. I went back to my roots. I put out feelers through communities of service industry workers. I sought out women like me, women who were overlooked, underestimated, but had a quiet strength and a deep well of empathy. I hired former waitresses, hotel housekeepers, and cafe baristas. I offered them fair wages, benefits, and real training in hospitality and wellness. I knew they would understand our clients' need for peace and respect better than anyone. They weren't just employees, they were the heart of what I was building. They were my people. For 2 years I lived in this dual reality. To the world and to my family, I had simply disappeared. The Gilded Lotus was no longer a social media sensation, just a quiet local spa. Fallon Maddox had fallen off the map. They probably assumed I had failed again, that my little empire had crumbled as they'd always predicted. And I let them. I let them believe I was gone. Because while they were laughing at my memory, I was quietly, secretly, and relentlessly growing. The next 2 years were a testament to the power of quiet, relentless work. The Wren Cove silent retreats became an underground success. We never advertised in a traditional sense. All our clients came through word of mouth, from high-level executives and burnt-out creatives who desperately needed to unplug. They would come to our secluded lodge, surrender their phones, and spend a week in guided meditation, nature walks, and profound silence. They left transformed, and they would tell their friends. The brand grew organically, its mystique enhanced by its anonymity. The profits were substantial, and I reinvested every single penny, slowly buying out more and more equity in the parent resort. Lorraine, meanwhile, was ready for her own retreat. She had seen the Gilded Lotus stabilized and thriving, and she had watched with a sort of quiet awe as I built Wren Cove from the shadows. She was approaching 70, and the fire in her belly had softened to a gentle, warm glow. She wanted to spend her remaining years gardening, reading, and traveling, not worrying about balance sheets and payroll. One afternoon, she called me into her office, the same small office where she had first offered me a chance. "It's time, Fallon," she said, her voice full of a peaceful finality. "I'm ready to retire." She slid a folder across the desk. It was a proposal to sell me her remaining shares in both the Gilded Lotus and her portion of our shared venture in Wren Cove. She had structured the buyout to be paid over 5 years, an easy, manageable sum for the business. "This was always your vision," she said, her eyes soft. "I was just the person who was lucky enough to open the door for you. Now it's all yours." The day I signed those papers, making me the sole owner of the entire enterprise I had built, was quiet and deeply emotional. There was no celebration, no fanfare, just me and Lorraine in a lawyer's office. The stroke of a pen changing everything. She was more than a mentor. She had been my first believer. She was the family I had chosen. With my position solidified, I moved on to the final piece of the puzzle. The underperforming resort we had partnered with was still struggling. The Wren Cove wing was a massive success, but the rest of the property was bleeding money. The owners were tired, and they were ready to sell, and I was ready to buy. My company, Wren Collective LLC, made an all-cash offer to acquire the entirety of Crestmore Resort. The name still sent a jolt through me every time I saw it on the legal documents. Crestmore, the site of my most profound humiliation, the ballroom where I had been dismissed, the polished floors I had fled across in tears. The thought of owning it, of holding the deed in my hand, was a strange, dizzying mix of terror and triumph. The negotiations were swift. My offer was more than fair, and the owners were eager to be free of the burden. The deal went through in late October. One crisp autumn afternoon, A courier delivered a large, heavy envelope to my small, unassuming office above the gilded lotus. I slid it open with a letter opener, my hand perfectly steady. Inside, nestled in a protective plastic sleeve, was the property deed for the Crestmore Resort and all its holdings. My name, Fallen Wren Maddox, CEO of Wren Collective LLC, was printed in bold, official type. I held it in my hands, the paper cool and heavy. I thought of Bryn's mocking laughter. I thought of my mother's cold command to leave. I thought of Theo's silent betrayal. I had just purchased the stage where they had performed their cruelty. For a moment, I considered sending them a copy, a petty, triumphant, in-your-face gesture. But the impulse faded as quickly as it came. That was their game, not mine. The power wasn't in rubbing their noses in my success. The power was in the quiet knowledge of what I had accomplished. It was in the silence, so I didn't tell a soul. I slid the deed into a secure file cabinet, locked it, and went back to work. The biggest victory of my life was a secret I kept all to myself, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal it, not for them, but for me. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope in early December. The calligraphy was elegant, the paper embossed with a single, tasteful snowflake. It was an invitation to the Maddox family annual Christmas reunion. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash. I hadn't attended a family event since Theo's wedding. A 3-year silence I had no intention of breaking. The wounds had scarred over, but they still ached when I thought about them. Why would I willingly walk back into that room of ghosts? Then my eyes fell on the venue line, printed in crisp black ink, hosted at the beautiful Crestmore Resort Grand Dining Hall. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that started deep in my belly. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My family, led by my social climbing mother who was undoubtedly trying to impress everyone by booking the most expensive place in the region, had chosen to host their party in my resort. They had no idea. The invitation felt like a cosmic dare, a test from the universe. I sat with it for a full day, turning it over and over in my hands. Part of me, the old wounded Fallon, wanted to go and lord it over them, to watch their faces crumble when they found out the truth. But another, newer part of me, the part that had signed property deeds and built a business from scratch, felt a deep sense of calm. I didn't need their shock or their apologies. I had already won. So why go? The debate raged in my mind. It felt like walking back into the fire. I was standing in my penthouse suite, one of the perks of ownership that I had only just begun to allow myself. Looking out over the snow-covered grounds of Crestmore when my phone rang. It was Lorraine. She had retired to a small cottage in the countryside, but we spoke every week. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice warm and knowing. She didn't have to specify what it was. "I did," I said, watching a groundskeeper hang a string of lights on a massive fir tree. "And you're thinking of not going," she stated. It wasn't a question. "It feels like a trap," I admitted. "Like I'm setting myself up to be hurt again. What's the point?" "What was the point of all of it, Fallon?" she asked gently. "The late nights, the stress, the sabotage, the risk. Was it for them? Was it to get back at them?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I said, my voice quiet. "No, it was for me. It was to prove to myself that I could." "Exactly," Lorraine said. "You built your own world, dear. You don't live by their rules anymore. You don't have to go there seeking their approval or their validation. You already have your own. So go. Just don't go to prove anything. Go because you don't have to." Her words clicked everything into place. She was right. My power didn't come from their reaction. My power came from my own sense of self. Going wasn't about them at all. It was about me. It was about walking back into the place of my greatest shame, not as a victim, but as the owner of the room. It was about closing a circle, for myself. Go because you don't have to. It was the most liberating advice I had ever received. I could walk in there completely free of their judgment, because their judgment no longer had any power over me. It was like being immune to a poison that had once nearly killed me. "Okay," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Okay, Lorraine, I'll go." After I hung up, I walked over to my closet. I didn't look for a dress that was flashy or ostentatious. I didn't want a revenge dress. I wanted a dress that felt like me. Now, I chose a simple, sleek black dress. It was elegant, understated, and powerful. It was the armor of a woman who knew her own worth and had absolutely nothing to prove. I arrived at Crestmore, not as a guest, but as the owner walking into her own property. I bypassed the main entrance and the valet, parking in my reserved spot in the private garage. I took the staff elevator up to my penthouse to get ready. The difference was profound. 3 years ago, I had arrived full of anxiety, my stomach in knots. Tonight, I felt a deep, unshakable calm. I looked in the mirror before I left. The woman staring back at me was different. Her eyes were clearer, her posture was straight, her smile was genuine. The frantic, hopeful girl was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident woman. I made my entrance into the grand dining hall, not with a bang, but with a whisper. I slipped in quietly, taking a moment to just observe. The room was exactly as I remembered from the hook: glittering chandeliers, long tables, the low hum of festive chatter. My family was all there, gathered near the massive stone fireplace. I started walking towards them. At first, no one noticed me. I was just another guest in a black dress. Then my cousin Bryn turned, a champagne flute in her hand. Her eyes scanned over me, and for a split second, there was no recognition, there was only appreciation. "Wow, that's a stunning dress," she said to her friend, her voice carrying across the room. Then her eyes did a double take. They widened, and the superficial smile froze on her face. "Fallon," she breathed, the name a puff of disbelief. Her exclamation turned heads. My mother, Coraline, who was deep in conversation with some society woman, turned. Her perfectly made-up face went slack, her mouth falling open in a small O of shock. It was as if she were seeing a ghost. A gasp rippled through the small family cluster. My uncle Darius squinted, as if trying to place me. Theo just stared, his face a mixture of surprise and something that looked like guilt. I offered them all a small, serene smile. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice even and calm. I walked over and helped myself to a glass of sparkling water from a tray held by a passing waiter, who gave me a subtle, respectful nod. Bryn was the first to recover, her shock quickly morphing back into its default setting: condescension. She looked me up and down, a critical glint in her eyes, searching for a flaw, a weakness. "Fallon, what a surprise," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We didn't think you'd show up. I mean, we hardly ever see you. You still doing that little yoga thing you were working on?" The question was a clear jab, a reference to the gilded lotus and her attempt to destroy it. She was trying to put me back in my box, to remind everyone that I was, and always would be, the loser cousin with the little hobbies. The rest of the family watched, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to get flustered, to defend myself, to shrink back into the person I used to be. But I didn't. I just took a slow sip of my water, met her gaze over the rim of my glass and smiled, a genuine knowing smile. And I said nothing at all. My silence was a wall she couldn't scale, and it confused her more than any angry retort ever could have. The storm was coming, but I was the calm at its center. The dinner was an exercise in surreal tension. I was seated back at the main table this time, a concession my mother must have made through gritted teeth. I was placed between a distant aunt I barely knew and my brother Theo, who spent the entire meal staring intently at his mashed potatoes as if they held the secrets to the universe. Across the table, Bryn kept shooting me poisonous looks, occasionally leaning over to whisper something to her father, Darius, which would inevitably be followed by a smug chuckle. They were trying to get a rise out of me, to bait me into a confrontation, but I refused to play. I ate my salmon, engaged in polite, surface-level conversation with my aunt, and remained an island of tranquility in their sea of dysfunction. I could feel their frustration mounting. My refusal to be the victim they needed me to be was ruining their fun. Dessert was being served. A decadent chocolate lava cake, with raspberry coulis. The festive atmosphere had returned. The wine was flowing, and my family seemed to have momentarily forgotten my unsettling presence, chalking it up to another one of Fallon's weird phases. Bryn was mid-story, regaling the table with a tale about her recent promotion at her father's company, her voice loud and self-congratulatory. It was in that moment that I saw him enter the room. Felix Granger, the man I'd hired 3 months ago to be the new general manager of Crestmore Resort. He was tall, distinguished, in a perfectly tailored suit, his demeanor the epitome of professional authority. He wasn't walking like a waiter, he was walking with the purpose of a man in charge. He strode directly to our table, his eyes scanning the guests until they landed on me. He stopped beside my chair, and the entire table fell silent, sensing a shift in the room's gravity. "Excuse me," Felix said, his voice resonant and clear, cutting through the chatter. He wasn't speaking to the table, he was speaking directly to me. He held out a small leather-bound folder. "Ma'am," he said, and the word hung in the air, weighted and significant. "Your penthouse key." Every single person at that table froze. It was a perfect cinematic moment of suspended animation. Bryn's spoon, laden with chocolate cake, stopped halfway to her lips. Coraline's wineglass, which she had just raised for a sip, froze in midair. Darius's jovial expression slackened into confusion. You could hear a pin drop. The silence was absolute. I looked up at Felix, my expression calm, and took the folder from his hand. "Thank you, Felix," I said softly. But he wasn't finished. He stood up straight, his voice now projecting to the entire silent room. "Just a few more items, ma'am," he continued, his tone formal and loud. "We've processed your staff's Christmas bonuses as you requested, and the final installment for the catering staff will be cleared tonight." He paused, letting the words sink in. My staff? My request? I could see the gears turning in their heads, the confusion morphing into disbelief. Then Felix delivered the final devastating blow. He looked directly at me, a flicker of a smile in his professional eyes. "And finally, I just wanted to confirm that the new ownership deed for Crestmore Resorts, filed under Wren Collective LLC, has been officially recorded with the county. Everything is in your name now. Merry Christmas, Ms. Maddox." The sound of Bryn's spoon clattering onto her dessert plate was like a gunshot in the silent room. Jaws literally dropped. My mother's face had gone from shocked to a ghostly, bloodless white. My uncle Darius looked like he had been physically struck, his mouth hanging open. Theo finally lifted his head from his plate, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The secret was out. The punchline had finally been delivered. But this time, the joke was on them. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin on the table. The owner of the room. The silence that followed Felix's announcement was thick and suffocating. It was a silence filled with the frantic, unspoken calculations of people whose entire worldview had just been shattered. They were all staring at me, their expressions a grotesque collage of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Bryn was the first to break. Her face, usually a mask of smug superiority, was a mess of confusion. What did he say?" she stammered, looking from me to my mother, then back to me. "What does he mean? Your staff? Is this some kind of joke, Fallon? Because it's not funny." My uncle Darius, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, his voice rough. "It's a gimmick, some kind of stunt. Did you pay that man to come in here and say that? How much did it cost you?" He looked at me with pure contempt, unable to process a reality where I held any kind of power. My mother Coraline just sat there, frozen. She looked pale, ill. Her hand was pressed to her chest, as if to keep her heart from beating its way out. The social humiliation, the sheer impossibility of it all, seemed to have rendered her speechless. I looked at each of them, my gaze steady and my heart, for the first time in my life, completely calm in their presence. There was no anger, no triumphant gloating, just a quiet, settled finality. "It's not a joke, Bryn," I said, my voice even. I turned to Darius. "And I didn't pay him to say anything. Felix Granger is the general manager of this resort, and he works for me." I let that sink in. I watched as the last vestiges of denial crumbled from their faces, replaced by the ugly, stark truth. Theo, my brother, finally spoke. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the tablecloth. Fallen. I'm sorry, he mumbled. It was the apology I had waited 3 years to hear, but now that it had come, it felt hollow and small. It was an apology for him, not for me. A desperate attempt to absolve himself, now that the power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. I know you are, Theo, I said, and I meant it. I knew he was sorry now. I looked around the table, at the ruins of my family's arrogance. My mother, who valued appearances above all else, had just been publicly shown up by the daughter she had written off. My uncle, who measured worth in dollars and cents, was a guest in his loser niece's establishment. And Bryn, who had built her identity on being better than me, was suddenly, undeniably, not. I'm not angry, I said, and the truth of that statement surprised even me. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving something cleaner and stronger in its place. I'm not here for revenge, I'm just done. I paused, letting my words land. I'm done pretending I'm less than I am, so that you can all feel more comfortable. I'm done being the joke. I'm done being your footnote. I picked up the leather folder with my penthouse key. I looked at my mother one last time. Her eyes were pleading now. A desperate, silent request for what? Forgiveness, for me to pretend none of this had happened. I didn't know, and I didn't care to find out. I had spent my entire life trying to decipher her needs, her moods, her disappointments. I was finished, without another word. I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked across the grand dining hall, my heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. I wasn't running away this time. I was just leaving them behind. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was silent and smooth. As the doors slid open, revealing the sprawling suite, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The living area was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the snow-covered mountains, glittering under a sky full of stars. A fire was crackling in the marble fireplace, and on a low table, just as Felix had promised, a bottle of expensive champagne was chilling in a silver bucket next to a single, elegant flute. This wasn't a prize I had won, it was a space I had earned. I slipped off my heels and walked barefoot across the plush, soft carpet. There was no lingering adrenaline from the confrontation, no bitter taste of victory. There was only a quiet, deep-seated sense of rightness. This was where I belonged. I didn't open the champagne right away. Instead, I walked over to the large desk in the corner and pulled out a simple, leather-bound journal and a pen. It was a habit I had picked up during the lonely, early days of building my business, a way to untangle my thoughts. I sat down and just wrote, not for anyone else, but for myself. The girl who had cried in the resort bathroom 3 years ago felt like a different person, a ghost from another life. I wrote about her. I wrote about her pain and her humiliation, and I thanked her for being strong enough to survive it. I thanked her for having the courage to take that first, terrifying step into the unknown. After a while, I closed the journal and walked over to the champagne. I popped the cork, the sound a soft, satisfying sigh in the quiet room. I poured myself a glass and walked out onto the private balcony. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of pine and snow. Below, the lights of the resort twinkled like a fallen constellation. My resort. I raised my glass not to my family, not to my enemies, but to the stars, a toast to the journey. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw it was a text from Lorraine. "Well," it said. I smiled and dialed her number. She picked up on the first ring. "So you went," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I went," I confirmed, taking a sip of the cold, bubbly champagne. It tasted like freedom. I told her everything that had happened, the reveal, the shock, the quiet finality of my departure. She listened, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm proud of you, Fallon," she said when I finished. "Not for the resort, not for the money. I'm proud of the woman you've become." "I couldn't have done it without you, Lorraine," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were the first person who saw me." "I just held up a mirror, dear," she replied. "You were the one who had the courage to look in it." We talked for a little while longer, then hung up. I stood on the balcony, alone with my thoughts, feeling a sense of wholeness I had never known. The victory wasn't in their shocked faces. The victory was right here, in this peaceful, quiet moment. It was in the knowledge that I had built a life on my own terms, out of the rubble of who they told me I was. I went back inside and opened my journal to a fresh page. I thought for a moment, then wrote down a single, simple truth. I didn't win because I got rich. I won because I know who I am now. And in the quiet of my penthouse, high above the world that had once tried to break me, that was more than enough. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The ones you mock today might just own the room tomorrow. Have you ever been the joke in your own family, only to surprise everyone later? Let me know in the comments. If you loved Fallon's journey, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, raw stories like this. Thanks for watching. Stay brave, stay kind, and never let anyone write your ending for you.